What encourages me most in this is the overwhelming response from Canadians. They have truly told us loudly and clearly what they believe is right and fair. We've heard publicly from the families of the victims of Clifford Olson themselves. We've heard from the national victims and victim support groups. These people, Mr. Speaker, whose lives have been so damaged by the actions of these criminals, are pleased and supportive of our government's action. They support this bill. We've also heard from rank-and-file police officers from across the country, people who often are the first to see firsthand the damage that is brought on by these criminals. And we've heard from regular, everyday taxpayers across our country, as I referred to earlier, the Tim Hortons crowd. The minister herself received a petition in support of this bill. It was signed by nearly 50,000 Canadians. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, Mr. Speaker. Many more thousands of people have told us, have told the minister, and told our colleagues that this bill is necessary. The response that we've seen and heard has truly been remarkable. When circumstances like this unjust entitlement are discovered, and when Canadians speak out so clearly and so loudly, we must listen to them and heed to their calls and to their advice and to their demands. It is not a credit to us that this unfair and wrong practice came into being and continued with little, if any, notice. It is not a credit to any of us that those who did not know it did little, if anything, to change it. We cannot change the past, but we certainly can fix the present and improve things for the future. That is what we are doing here today with the continued second reading of Bill C-31. The bill is also in line with many of our Conservative government's other related actions with respect to the victims of crime and their families. We have a strong record of action, and this piece of legislation only builds upon that record. Mr. Speaker, the bill is in keeping with our Conservative government's commitment to put victims and law-abiding Canadians first, and certainly to put them ahead of criminals. It puts an end to the hardworking Canadian taxpayers paying twice for prisoners, and to having victims of crime having to see their victimizers receive unjust public help. Finally, this bill is about the responsible use of tax-paying public funds and the fair treatment to all Canadian taxpayers. It is the fair and right thing to do. It is what Canadians want us to do. We need to listen to Canadians. We need to pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to the questions that the members might have.
Question et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Mississauga South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his speech. I think it's been very helpful. I haven't had an opportunity to read the bill, but I did listen to the prior speech, and I heard most of the minister's speech. And there's one question, maybe the member, I think he's a lawyer by profession, and he may be aware. If we have a circumstance where we have two identical persons, one of which, for lack of years of residency, does not qualify, say, for instance, for old age security, and the other one does, and they both commit the same crime, and they're both sentenced to the same term in prison of something, say, over 2 years, one would get the additional penalty, as it were, of not getting the old age security. And I guess I'm putting it in the context of, is this not a situation, and that's why I'm asking just for information purposes, where the penalties prescribed under the law would be different from for two persons who committed exactly the same crime in all the same details?
Member for Edmonton St. Albert.
The question, and I'm not sure that I do. The question is, if two individuals commit the same crime, but one would otherwise be entitled to OAS and the other one wouldn't, does that create a differential in penalties if this bill is passed? Well, the result would be the same. The one individual who was otherwise entitled to OAS and became a federal prisoner would thus be disentitled. So under that circumstance, neither would be getting it, so they would be treated fairly and equally. But I think that really misses the point of this legislation. This legislation is to disentitle serious criminals, those who are incarcerated for more than 2 years in a federal institution or more than 90 days in a provincial institution, from being paid twice. being paid once by having their room and board paid for by the taxpayers of Canada as they are sentenced to spend time in an institution, and then to subsequently receive OAS and GIS on their 65th birthday.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. Resuming debate. Resuming. You have another question? Okay. The honourable member for Mississauga South.
All right, I'll try once again then, Mr. Speaker. I understand that if one person doesn't get OAS and another one who is in the same position did and it's taken away, then they would both get nothing. But the issue is that someone had an entitlement, a financial entitlement, and there is real value being taken away. And therefore the law would prescribe this is the term of sentence prescribed by the judge for both persons. But the law would also say that, and should you be entitled to anything else, we'll take that away too. It's only applicable to you. So there is that differential in terms of the two cases. So I raise it simply about whether there could be a problem that the punishment, whether it be in time or in other consequences, is different for two persons who commit exactly the same crime.
The honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert.
Well, assuming this is relevant, and I don't know that it is, I suppose the member has sort of made a point, but there's nothing unique about a situation where individuals who receive a disposition from a criminal court ultimately have that disposition changed. I mean, an obvious example would be if an individual received a life sentence and expired or died while he was in prison. He would end up serving less time than another person, another lifer who was able to serve more time. So these differentiations really, I believe, are irrelevant and certainly take away from the good content of this legislation, which is to disentitle federal inmates from tax-paid supplements such as old age security and the guaranteed income supplement paid for by taxpayers who are concurrently paying for those prisoners to be housed in federal institutions.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to ask the member what the government of the day and the Prime Minister of the day had in mind when they initiated the program in the first place, because it's my understanding that it was the Joe Clark government, Conservative government of 1979, who did initiate the OAS and the GIS into play at the time when the Clark government changed the rules. So I'd just like to ask the member whether he's looked into and read anything in terms of what sort of arguments were in play to allow the Conservative government of Joe Clark to change the rules to allow these prisoners to get OAS and GIS in the first place.
The honourable member for Edmonton St. Albert.
I was not a member of this House when that individual, Mr. Clark, was the Prime Minister of Canada. What I can speak to is this legislation, the legislation that is before the House. And I think all members must fairly admit that when the newspapers published the story back in the spring of 2010 about Mr. Olson's entitlement and how much money he had actually saved from those entitlements and what his monthly stipend was, we were all caught off guard. So we all bear some responsibility for the fact that this went unnoticed for so long. But Canadians were rightfully outraged when they found out what was happening, that federal prisoners were receiving, I think it's slightly in excess of $1,100 per month. Now, I know the honourable member represents members in Winnipeg. I'm sure a lot of the seniors in his constituency do not bank $1,100 per month because they use these entitlements, these stipends, this government assistance to pay their mortgage, to pay their rent, to pay for heating bills. So they don't bank $1,100 a month like a federal prisoner does. So when this government found out of this inequality, the taxpayers were paying twice, paying for room and board, and also paying the monthly stipend. It acted quickly, and that brings us to the debate here today on Bill C-31.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires.